So, good morning, everyone. We are back to the book On the Way to the Light. Let me share the screen here. A reminder that we are not many here today, but a reminder that this book was pshychographed by Francisco Candido Xavier from the Spirit Emmanuel, and it tells the story of the world from the view of Emmanuel in the spiritual world, from his learnings and his understanding. So some of the things that he puts here in the books do not really match history, and we will leave it open to interpretation and to understanding and acceptance to each one of us. So especially today, we're going to talk about some delicate statements by Emmanuel in relation to religion, and we'll try to give a historical aspect also of what Emmanuel brings to us compared to what history tells us. Last month we studied we ended the medieval era. We talked a little bit about the Renaissance, and but now we're moving full steam in the period after the Renaissance, in the centuries after the Renaissance. Okay, Zoraida, you read for us?
Yes, of course. Okay, the Renaissance of the world. Regenerative movements. At the dawn of the 15th century, when the medieval era was about to end, large assemblies of spirits met in the vicinities of the planet to direct regenerative movements, which in light of Christ's determinations would lead the world into a new era. Its entire regenerative effort took place under his merciful and compassionate gaze as he poured out his light on all hearts. Devoted messengers reincarnated on the orb to carry out loving and redemptive missions. On the Iberian Peninsula, under the guidance of Henry of Sage, who was responsible for great and beneficial accomplishments, schools were founded for the navigators to sail the seas in search of unknown lands. Numerous precursors to the Reformation appeared everywhere, fighting against abuses of religious nature. Former masters of Athens reincarnated in Italy to spread the most beautiful jewels of genius and sentiment in the eras of painting and sculpture. England and France prepared for the great democratic mission that Christ would entrust to them. Commerce spread from the restricted waters of the Mediterranean to the great waves of the Atlantic in search of forgotten roads to the east. Jesus guided this rebirth of all human activities, which would define the positions of various European countries, and invested each one with a particular responsibility in the structure of the planet's collective revolution. To facilitate the extraordinary effort of this immense endeavor of renewal, the Divine Master's auxiliaries introduced into Europe ancient inventions and useful implements from the East, such as the compass for the maritime endeavors and paper for the divulgation of thought.
Okay, so here we are talking about the end of the medieval era, after the Black Plague devastated Europe, killed between half and 2/3 of the population of Europe, depending on the region, and ended the feudalism system. And countries started being formed in Europe. The countries, many as we know them today, started being the frontiers being defined at that time. France, Spain, and Portugal. Spain and Portugal liberated themselves from the domain of the Arabs and the Turks, the Ottoman Empire. It's important to understand that at that time, Europe was isolated from the East, meaning India and China, because of the Ottoman Empire that blocked the passage of the Europeans to the East. So to go around the Ottoman Empire, the Europeans, especially in Portugal and Spain, started to have the idea of reaching the eastern region by sea. So they started the navigation advancements of that time, and the main responsible for this development, as Emmanuel mentions here, was Henry of Sagres, or Henry the Navigator, which was a Portuguese duke and prince that created the maritime school in Sagres, that was responsible for a great development of the navigation systems and the navigation learning of the time. So talking here from the spiritual point of view, Emmanuel tells us that as Renaissance starts, a number of missionaries or messengers reincarnated to help in the advancement of human civilization. So all these great figures, some of them known to us and some of them unknown to us, lost in time, reincarnated at that time. And he mentions specifically masters of Athens reincarnating in Italy. And you can imagine Leonardo da Vinci or Michelangelo to spread the most beautiful jewels of genius and sentiment. And important figures in England, in France also, being born, preparing for the democracy in the future. So we studied last month that England created the House of Commons at around that time, and start to give some voice to the common people. France, of course, with the monarchy, but with the intellectual advancement that would predominate in the later centuries. And Portugal and Spain really with the navigation and the exploration of the new worlds. It's generally it's out of necessity that we look for advancements, and our needs makes us look for alternatives. That's why it's always important for us at this stage of evolution to have needs. And that's why we don't have the whole population of the world living in comfort, because if we do that, we make no effort to progress. Very few minds work for progress itself. Most people work for something, for the carrot in front of them. So the need to find different avenues to bring things from the East is what caused the navigation, which is an important part that we are going to talk a little bit in this chapter. Emmanuel talks here about Jesus guiding the rebirth of human activities, because as we mentioned last month, during the medieval times, during the feudalism system, the world pretty much progressed very little. There is always progress, as we know, but the amount of progress in the 1,000 years since the fall of the Roman Empire and the beginning of the Renaissance, it's not very significant. of course, you find a lot of things here and there that were important on the scientific evolution, on the religious evolution, and everything. But most of it, we really didn't make much of a progress. And then the Renaissance brought a lot of progress in a very short period of time, in terms of again, short period of time, couple of 100 years. Or 300 years is a short period of time in terms of our evolution, and that culminates with the 19th century, with the separation of science and religion, and that's when we started really moving faster in terms of progress, and until we reach today. So just to finish here, Emmanuel mentions that in the inventions that came to Europe and useful implementations from the East, we have the printing, which was a huge advancement brought by Gutenberg in the 1500s, if I'm not mistaken, and a lot of what was brought with Marco Polo from China, and all these advancements that came from the East that helped Europe progress. Remember, we're talking about history from the point of view of the Western civilization, which is Europe-based progress, okay? Where we discussed a little bit about the Eastern civilizations, China and India, in the beginning of this book. But as we move towards the end of the book, the focus is on Europe and the Americas more than in the Eastern part of it. Okay. Any comments, questions here?
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. The mission of the Americas. Christ then set his abundant hopes on the Americas. The 16th century dawned with the discovery of the New World, but Europeans at the time generally did not grasp the importance of such an event. The fabulous riches of India dazzled the adventuresome spirit of the time, and the crowned heads of the old world did not understand the moral significance of the new. Nonetheless, Jesus' workers were unmoved by the criticism and applause of the world and carried out their great duties within the environment of those new lands. Under a higher determination, they organized the evolutionary lines of the nationalities and that would flourish there in the future. On that field of new and regenerative struggles, all spirits of goodwill could work for the advent of peace and fraternity of humanity's future. And for that reason, having in mind the forthcoming centuries, they defined the role of each region on the new continents, placing the brain of the new civilization where today's United States is located in North America, and its heart in the abundant and welcoming lands of Brazil and South America. The former was to hold the material powers, the latter, the first fruits of the spiritual powers, destined for the planetary civilization of the future.
Okay. So first, let's remember that this book was dictated in 1938, okay, before the Second World War. And the United States was already a world power, but not yet the biggest power that it became after the Second World War. You know, a curiosity here, when you think about the two big monuments that France gave to the United States and Brazil, and that represents what Emmanuel talks here about the heart and the brain. The Statue of Liberty with the crown, meaning the brain, and the Christ the Redeemer in Rio, which was also a gift from France, where the heart is a big part of what it is. So, you know, that's an interesting
It is.
point here. But let's talk a little bit about the colonization of the Americas, as that's what Emmanuel talks here. So in the beginning, he says that the Europeans didn't pay much attention to it because the Europeans really were looking for ways to get to the East. They didn't, they were not aware of the existence of the world. There was, it's not that was completely unknown. And actually, if you study the civilization, the colonization of the Americas, you'll see that Norway was in North Canada and Greenland in the 18th century. Iceland also, which is very close to Greenland, colonized part of Greenland in between 1000 and 1100. And these were, you know, so you have remains of these settlements of the 1000 around that time that is found in Newfoundland, Canada. So there are signs of civilization, but what we're talking here in terms of colonization, meaning coming and staying, and that started really in 1492 with Columbus, when he went to find a way to what so-called the India, the Eastern civilizations, and ended up landing in the Caribbean. He first thought that he had reached India, and it took them a while to recognize that this was a whole new continent. And then, you know, in the beginning was basically Spain and Portugal that conquered North and South America and Central America and the Caribbean. Britain started 100 years later because the first colonizations of the first settlements here in America is in the 1600s in Jamestown, right? I think it's 1622, and Brazil and Mexico is in the 1500s. So the colonization here, of course, we know all the discussions that still happen today, but what the Europeans brought to America was really a lot of new people, the Europeans settlers starting to take over. And in terms of progress, that of course the Europeans were more advanced than the natives. The natives were still living in very primitive conditions, and of course, and then you have all the persecutions, the killings, and actually the contamination through diseases that were unknown here. But that's not, you know, that's the historical facts. So we're talking here in terms of spiritual evolution. What Emmanuel is telling us is that in the spiritual world, they were preparing the so-called New World for the advancement of civilization. Civilization advances all over, but the role of the new continent, as Emmanuel says here, was going to be very important. And we know by the intellectual and power dominance of the United States today in the world. And again, we're not here to discuss politics. We're not here discuss if it's right or wrong, but it's just what the United States presents in the world today in terms of dominance. It's really what was Britain, at one point France, at one point Britain, and in the beginning of the colonization, what was Spain and Portugal, the main powers in the world. So the power of the world was, in terms of political power, was transferred from Europe to North America, especially. So what's important here also in terms of religion is that a lot of the settlers that came especially to North America they were escaping the religious wars that were starting in Europe with the Reformation that broke away with the Catholic dominance, also in England, when you had the Anglican Church, Henry VIII creating a new religion, and a lot of conflicts with the so-called Puritans that ended up leaving the Britain and establishing themselves here in this country. So we have to bring a little bit of history, but we have to understand the spiritual nature of this evolution. And when Emmanuel talks here, we will have to remember, we are going to talk a little bit about Emmanuel later, and his relevance and his connection to Brazil. He was one of as Manuel da Nóbrega, a priest. He was the founder of the first capital of Brazil, Salvador, with other people, and then he was the founder of the largest city in South America, which is São Paulo, in 1554. So he has been involved with Brazil in his past incarnations. He had another incarnation as Padre Amaro, Father Amaro in Brazil, also in the I think it's the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century. So he has a lot of connections to Brazil, and actually it is said that he is reincarnated in Brazil, but that's an information that we don't know the details, and we're not going to speculate here. But so he has this connection with Brazil, and he sees from the spiritual world when he's bringing this book the importance of Brazil in terms of the dissemination of this new doctrine that was born in France in the middle of the 19th century, and that is really based in Brazil with the vast majority of spiritists in Brazil. So why Brazil? Because Brazil is big enough to go to send people abroad in large numbers, as it's doing today, and spreading spiritism throughout the world. Okay. Comments, questions here. Also, we have in terms of spiritism, spiritualism, remember that we have a Spiritist Review special edition that talks only about the US, and Kardec's work in the Spiritist Review, and all the articles related to the US and the birth and development of spiritualism and early spiritism here in the US. Okay. Comments? Anyone? Questions? No? Nothing? Okay, it's going to be me talking today only. Okay.
It's very hard to contradict historical facts. I mean, to add anything to what you had already have said, it's almost impossible. That's why we are quiet, so that you don't want to participate. But one thing that is interesting is that, well, at least as much as I know of history, the first colonizers, they left Britain and went to North America, went in a religious mission, so to say. They were free, trying to be freed from the oppression of the Catholic Church and practice the Protestantism freely in North America, right?
Yes.
They already went as family.
Yeah, exactly. That's the it's a good point, Elmo. A difference between the colonization of the North and of the South is that here to America, families would move here definitely, leave behind the persecution, and actually it was a double persecution that they were facing, right? Because they became Protestants, and in Britain you couldn't you were as they were imposing the Anglican Church, the Church of England, that is it's called today. The ones that were Protestant had to leave if they didn't want to follow the Church of England. So that's what makes families move. And the colonization in South America were really people would go there to become rich and left their family behind. So in South America, you have the Portuguese and the Spanish mainly going by themselves. And of course, from that, the miscegenization in Brazil, especially with the first with the natives and then with slaves, is what created the population that is so mixed race nowadays, especially in Brazil. So that's the big difference here in the to the US. It was more of a religious family formation, and they would come with their family. So the miscegenation was less happened much less, and that create, of course, it helps creates also the racism and the differences, right? The different how they dealt with natives depend on where you talk about, right? Depends on the region, and it's important to remember also that here in North America there was a part that was dominated by Spain for a long time. Mexico was much bigger than it was today, and also the western part was dominated by Spain until the 17th century, 18th century. Canada was part French, part Britain, part Spain, part Russian. Alaska belonged to Russia until the end of the 19th century. So we're talking about different countries colonizing, and then you have also in smaller parts the Dutch. You have the Norway, especially in the Caribbean also. So you will see different colonizations, and each one of them will have a different way of colonizing and a different way of persecuting, killing, integrating with the natives. You had all three of them, okay? They would either integrate and use them to help, and the natives, for instance, they sided with France to try to prevent the domination of Britons. The Dutch, which were always very commercial, they own Manhattan here, and they exchanged Manhattan with the British for Suriname eventually, because they knew that they would be expelled. So instead of being expelled, they decided that let's negotiate. And that's why you still have a lot of Dutch heritage here in Manhattan and this region. So, a lot of different ways of colonizing. But in South America was mostly Portuguese and Spanish men going by themselves and leaving. When they become rich, they left heirs behind, or when some of them eventually took their families back to Brazil, some of them went back. So there is a lot of mixtures there in South America, especially in Brazil, a little less in Spain, in the Spanish domination of South Americans and Mexico. And the Spanish were much more aggressive towards the natives. They massacred much more the natives than the Portuguese did. And here in the U.S., there was less miscegenation between the colonization and the natives, and I would say less persecution than the Spanish, in a sense. Okay.
So what I see is the paradox of the historical facts and of the statement of Emmanuel. While in North America, they came in seeking to establish the rights to exercise Christianity. In Brazil, the Portuguese went over there to exploit, to suckle the richness, regardless of anything else. And the paradox is exactly that it's the American who come, the Britons who came in with the religious fact, and the Portuguese that went over there with more of the brain fact, and yet Emmanuel states that is the opposite. The colonization of Brazil was to bring something of the religious, of the moral aspect, and the North America was for more the intellectual. It's quite paradoxical, the two things there.
Yeah, and again, that's why I said in the beginning that we have to understand that this is Emmanuel's view from the spiritual world, and looking at history from a bird's eye view of how things would end up in these different places and the differences. So and again, we're just studying, trying to combine the spiritual understanding of Emmanuel of the history of civilization and bringing some historical facts. So the fact that we study history and we see what happens according to history doesn't always match what Emmanuel brings to us. And actually, we're going to see this very shortly in a very strong sense. But I'll leave it for when we get there. But yes, you're right.
Yeah, no, I'm not disagreeing at all with Emmanuel. I just want to make this point here. I just pointing out how things, even the big plans, the works in a ways that is very hard for us to figure out when we are living the facts, that you have to look ahead to see the realization of the final plan.
Yeah. Yeah. When if you think of when Emmanuel dictated this book in the 1930s, right? The Spiritism was dying in France, and the agreement for all the Spiritists to be reincarnated in Brazil was already taking place, right? So Spiritism was being transferred from France to Brazil, especially in the works of Francisco Xavier and other early Spiritist precursors in Brazil, like Dr. Bezerra de Menezes and Zilda Gama and Ivone Pereira, Eurípides Balsanufo, yes. Yeah. So these are also probably early Spiritists in France that discarnated very early in Spiritism and reincarnated in Brazil. So maybe Emmanuel was talking about that. I don't know. It's a possibility, right?
Yep.
Okay. Anyone else here? Let's move on. Okay.
Okay. The invisible realm and the colonization of the New World. After the discovery of the Americas, a great effort of spiritual selection was implemented amid the struggles in Europe in order to create another sense of evolution in the New World. If the colonizers of the Americas were at first exiles or outcasts from European societies, one must remember that these settlers did not come only from the great capitals of the old world, considered from the exclusive point of view of the material plane. Countless groups of good-willed souls also departed from the invisible rim to incarnate in these new lands as children of those outcasts who were often persecuted by the iniquity of human justice. Joining these more or less advanced exiles were many European spirits who had grown weary of the inglorious struggles of hegemony and ambition and were looking for redemption in the constructed effort of a new homeland on the solid basis of fraternity and love. Hence, the more elevated sentiments amongst the American peoples regarding the understanding of continental community. If we recognize the spiritual projection of Europe in the Americas, we must realize that it became a more knowledgeable and experienced Europe, not only concerning the problems of international harmony and human solidarity, but also regarding all the issues that entail the true assets of life.
Okay, so here Emmanuel brings a different view of the new settlers in Americas, because we tend to look at the material point of view. So families emigrating from UK to here to the US, individuals emigrating from Spain and Portugal to South America, Central America, but we have to remember that this takes place over a couple of hundred years, right? From 1500 to the 1700, end of the 1700s. So you have a lot of new spirits reincarnating in the Americas already. So when a couple that goes from Britain to America settles, and then they have 7 kids here, which is what's the number that they were having, right? They had 10 kids, lose 5 at birth, but 5 were still ended up growing. And these are spirits that are born in this new land. So they don't know the old land in terms of the material aspect. They are born in the new land. But as spirits, they bring with them as Emmanuel says here, the struggles, and have grown wary of the struggles in Europe, because remember, Europe had been fighting wars for as long as civilization exists, and we are about to enter here, when this book is written, in the biggest of them, the Second World War, which was really a disaster for Europe in terms of spiritual values. It really destroyed a lot of spiritual values in Europe and caused Europe today to be a very anti-religious region, mostly, especially, if you consider that 30% of Europe do not believe in God or in any religion, and so the spiritual understanding, even if it's limited, restricted, but still exists much more in both North and South America than in Europe. So the progress of the spiritual aspect of the human population had to be transferred to the Americas in order for us to continue moving forward. And again, with all limitations, with all the problems, we are all humans, we have free will, and we keep making mistakes. We keep making a mess out of our beliefs. but the important thing, if you look at in terms of a longer period of time, is the survival and the continuation of the dissemination of the spiritual values. And that's what Emmanuel is trying to tell us. The importance of the new world was to carry on the spiritual values as much as possible, right? So the religion here in America, of course, you can discuss and criticize, but America is a deep religious country. 90% of people here believe in God. And more, of course, we are seeing people moving away from organized religions, but this is a whole different discussion. The fact that you move away from a organized religion doesn't mean that you are less spiritual. So people are looking for different spiritual values. And when you talk about Brazil, for instance, that you have, which is a predominant Catholic country because of the Portuguese colonization, more and more also you have people moving away from Catholic religion and moving into the evangelical religions, and also Spiritism continues to grow. So the spiritual search for spirituality still continues and still exists, and it's still much more predominant in the Americas than it's in Europe nowadays. And as we try to disseminate Spiritism here in this country, and we have a little bit of contact with the dissemination of Spiritism in Europe, especially, we see that this country it receives it spreads much more easily than in Europe. In Europe, it's really what you have is Brazilians in Brazilian groups, with very few of the locals joining because they are not prepared to accept spirituality. Every time you mention God or Jesus, it becomes a problem, much more there than here in this country. I'm not saying that it's easy, but you see these differences in Europe and here in the United States. And actually, United States and Canada are different also. Canada is a much more European in terms of spirituality than the United States, in a sense. Okay. Any questions here, comments? Okay. Let's move on.
The apogee of the Renaissance. Initiated in the higher realms, this rebirth shone on the earth far and wide. The invention of the printing press facilitated incredible progress in the world of ideas, leading to wonderful expressions of an intellectual life. Literature took on new life, and the arts reached heights unreachable by future generations. Numerous artisans of ancient Greece reincarnated in Italy to leave indelible vestige of their passage in precious marvel. In every area of artistic endeavor, there was a pronounced taste of Greek life, which was prior to the austere disciplines of Catholicism in the medieval era, and whose rules were strictly applied only to those who were not an integral part of the circle of ecclesiastical authorities.
Ecclesiastical authorities.
Ecclesiastical authorities, thank you.
So when I talk about the Renaissance here, we mentioned before a little bit what you see. Remember, we mentioned last month, right? The reincarnations. You had the Athens the Athenian civilization and ideas reincarnating in France. You had Sparta, the warlike civilization of Sparta reincarnating in Germany. And, you know, you have the Romans, which in the end, a lot of artists that here, as they said, of Greece reincarnated in Italy, which was in artistic terms, was really the most important center in the Renaissance. In terms of painting, sculptures, you have, as we mentioned before, Michelangelo, you have Leonardo da Vinci, and you have the painters, but also you have painters in other countries. So, and all of these reincarnating from Greece, bringing the artistic sense. Remember, when we reincarnate, we bring with us all the moral evolvements that we have, and what is useful for us in terms of the intellectual evolvement that we have. So artists in Greece, if they are going to reincarnate to use their art to help humanity, they are going to bring their artistic side very strongly with them in the new reincarnation, and will be able to continue their work. So the work of the Renaissance in Italy that you can still see in museums and paintings, museums, and etc. You see strong relation to artists in Greece. So the ideas also that come with this, you bring the artistic side, but also you bring some progressive ideas that are outside of the domination of the church that existed at that time. So the church actually, in the beginning, the church, especially in Italy, they actually sponsored a lot of these artists. And as long as the artists didn't stray away from religion, they were supported by the church, and they were paid by the church. You have the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican, which was sponsored by the church and paid to Michelangelo, right? And it's a wonderful work of art. So it's not that the church was against art. On the contrary, the church was very in favor of arts as long as it didn't deviate from the control of the church, right? Everything that would move outside the church will be suppressed and will be, you know, you could be persecuted, burned at stake, and all these things that the church did, and also the Inquisition was still part of that time in history. So. Again, the spiritual world has always an important role in the spirits that are being reborn and where they are being reborn. The spirits themselves can participate in this process by choosing the places and the more convenient regions where they can continue developing their work and they continue developing their growth. Okay, if they are part of the reincarnation process, they are involved with it. So there you have the Renaissance at this period of time from the 1400 to the 1900s. And one thing that is important to mention here, which was really another very important part of the Renaissance, is the printing press that was brought by Gutenberg. The printing press was a device that he created where you could print really. It was in the beginning, it was in cloth, in paper, other mediums. Gutenberg was a German inventor, and he created the printing press. He lived from 1400 to 1468, and that's where in 1439 he was the first European to use the movable type, which is responsible for the mass producing of printing at that time. The first book was printed, of course, was the Bible, but that allowed the ability to disseminate books and in a much more mass-producing way. Before Gutenberg, books were written manually, and they were very valuable. Actually, when people died, they would leave part of their heritage would be books, right? Be a very valuable part of their will will be the books. And after Gutenberg, then books start to be more common. And with that, remember, at the time, very few people knew how to read and write. So books start to leave the church and go a little bit more into to people, and that's where you start later, 100 years later after Gutenberg, you have Martin Luther starting the Reformation that we're going to talk in a little bit. But the printing books were in great part responsible for the Reformation, because the Reformation brings the Bible in its native languages. So because before that, the Bible was in Latin. Very people that couldn't understand Latin could not understand what was said at the masses, and only part of the mass was not in Latin, was in the language of the place, so the sermon in general. So they would just listen to the sermon. The rest of the mass, they couldn't understand anything. And when one of the characteristics of the Reformation is the Bible written in their own languages, and that started with Martin Luther. But before Martin Luther, also you have Jan Hus in Czech, which was Kardec, previous incarnation of Kardec, talking about it. But we're going to see this in a little bit. Okay. Any questions, comments here?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, go on.
The religious renaissance. Having strayed from the Christian path, the church could not escape these reformist activities. The invisible plane thus ordered the coming to the world of numerous missionaries for the purpose of implementing the renaissance of religion in order to regenerate its lax centers of power. Consequently, the venerable figures of Luther, Calvin, Erasmus, Melanchthon, and other remarkable personalities of the Reformation appeared in the 16th century in the Central Europe and the Low Countries. At the time of the first protests against the embrittled opulence of the church's leaders, the pontifical cathedral was occupied by Leo X, whose worldly life made a disagreeable impression on sincerely religious spirits. Under his supervision, the famous Book of Taxes of the Sacred Chancery and Sacred Apostolic Penitentiary, which stipulated the price of absolution of every sin and adultery, including the most heinous crimes, was created in 1518. Such degradations of ecclesiastical dignity gave impetus to the sermons of Luther and his companions of the pulpit. Persecution and threats against the eminent Augustinian monk did no good whatsoever. Some historians had seen his mission as a mere expression of spite on behalf of his fellow monks due to Leo's preference in assigning Dominicans with preaching for indulgences. The truth is, however, that the humble son of Elizabeth became the agent of widespread revolt against the abuses of the church regarding dogmatic imposition, and monetary extortion. Above all else, Luther's theses were a way to combat Roman absurdities. They were not the ideal pathway for religious truths. He responded to the extremism of abuse with the extremism of intolerance, thereby harming his own doctrine. Even so, his effort was crowned with remarkable importance for the roads of the future.
Okay.
Okay.
So let's talk here about the Reformation, and there is a lot of to talk here. The Reformation was a major movement in Western Christianity in the 16th century, right? It started, the Reformation was the start of Protestantism, and it ended up splitting the church in between the Roman Catholic Church and Protestantism, which is now today, right? Usually, it's considered to start with the publication of the 95 Theses by Martin Luther in 1517, right? So Martin Luther was a monk. He was born in as they say here, in Eisleben in Germany, and he became disgusted with, especially with the so-called indulgences. So he had a lot of differences with the church, but let's first mention this Pope Leo X, because Leo X was actually the last Pope not to have been a priest. Okay, at that time, the Pope was a very political position. Normally, they were chosen by the powerful families in Italy. The Medicis were the most important family at that time. Pope Leo X was a Medici. He was a Pope from 1513 to 1521, only for 8 years. But he was born in the Medici family, and he wanted to build the Vatican. He wanted to pay to rebuild the St. Peter's Basilica, and uses Raphael and Michelangelo to decorate the Vatican rooms. So he needed money, and the way that he found to get more money was by selling indulgences. Indulgency is a way to reduce the amount of punishment one has to undergo for the sins. Now, there were two types of indulgences. There were the indulgences for living people and indulgences for people that were dead. So people died, went to died let's talk about that time. People died, and they went to heaven, hell, or paradise, away or purgatory, a way to take them away from heaven, from hell, and move them to purgatory or send them to heaven was to buy an indulgence. So the families of the rich families of the ones that have died would pay for indulgences in order for the souls of their loved ones to go to a better place in the spiritual world. And the indulgence for the living ones, which was much more with much more controversy, was to redeem you for your sins. But the interesting thing is to redeem you from your sins, past, present, and future. So you buy an indulgence and you are free to commit any sins because you are already forgiven.
It's the best investment you could ever make.
Yes. If you look from our point of view today, it seems completely absurd, right? But you have to put yourself in the 15th century, where the church dominated everything. You have very little knowledge beyond what the church told you. So whatever the church told you, it was what was right. Now, of course, the rich families, they would buy indulgences because, not necessarily because they believed they would save. I'm sure many believe, but that was the only way to keep themselves connected in good graces of the church, which was the dominant power of the time. So in a way, you would buy indulgences. It was just a donation to the church that you had to do anyway. So if you could, buy an indulgence, and let's hope it works, right? Nobody came back to tell from the other side if it was working or not working. Officially, we know unofficially that's a different story, right? So Martin Luther really revolted against that. Parenthesis here. There are some books that tell that Martin Luther is the reincarnation of Paul the Apostle, okay? Not going to, again, it's not our role here to discuss reincarnations, names that are not doesn't come from different sources, but a very famous author in Brazil, Hermínio Miranda, which has wonderful books and is very respected. One of his books talks about Paul's reincarnation as Martin Luther. Okay, so it comes from a very trustable source, but that's the only source. So let's not expand into that. So let's talk about a little bit about the other names that we see here, because they talk about Luther, Calvin, Erasmus, and Melanchthon. Before we talk about those, let's talk about the precursor of the Reformation, our dear friend Jan Hus. And why we have to talk about him? Because he was a previous incarnation of Kardec. He lived from 1372 to 1415. It's Jan Hus in Czech. Sometimes you find John Hus or John Hus. He was a Czech theologian and philosopher who became a church reformer, and he was the inspiration of Hussitism, which is a key predecessor to Protestantism. Huss is considered, after John Wycliffe, the theorist of the ecclesiastical reform, Huss is considered the second church reformer, as he lived before Luther, Calvin, and Zwingli. So the Reformation started before Martin Luther. It's considered to officially have started with Martin Luther, but before him, you had already others that were challenging the ways of the church at that time. And Jan Hus ended up being burned at stake when he was tricked into have a meeting to discuss his positions. He never broke away from the church. He just adapted what the teachings of the church. And he had very strong views on simony, which is the act of selling church offices and roles for sacred things. We discussed about this. He had also he discussed the role of Jesus in the sense that Jesus and God is one and the same. He had doubts about that. Also, the Eucharist is the rite that is the sacred sacrament in churches. He also had some differences of view, and because of all that, he ended up being burned at stake. Okay, so this is our dear Kardec in a previous incarnation. Melanchthon was a German reformer, and he's considered the intellectual leader of the Lutheran Reformation. He was theologian, and he was the one that, along with Luther, denounced the exaggerated cult of the saints. And we all know that in Protestantism, they ended up abolishing saints. And he was one of the main minds behind that. Erasmus was a Dutch philosopher and a Christian scholar. He was one of the greatest scholars of the Renaissance. He was a Catholic priest. He never left the Catholic Church. He remained a member for all his life, but he tried to keep some distance from Luther, Henry VIII, which was the king of England that separated the religion in England, and John Calvin, that we're going to talk in a little bit. And until the end of his life, he continued recognizing the authority of the Pope, but he always tried to find a middle way. His main difference with Luther's is that Luther's emphasis was on faith alone, meaning only your faith could save you, not your acts. And that's what by the end of this item here, when Emmanuel talks about Luther's thesis was a way to combat Roman absurdities, but they were not the ideal pathway to religious truths, because it responded to extremism of abuse with the extremism of intolerance. The intolerance that he had is the only way to salvation is the faith, the complete faith in Jesus and God, and your acts did not matter. Only your faith mattered. I don't know how you measure the faith. The literal interpretation of the words of the Bible was also something that was brought with Luther, and Erasmus had some different views from that. He was a scholar, so he was a profound studies of religion. So he criticized the abuses of the Catholic Church, and he was always calling for reforms, but he never moved away from the church. He died suddenly in Basel in 1536, and every time you see someone that died suddenly at that time, you question how they really died, right? Calvin was the one that disseminate Protestantism in mainly in where is today Switzerland, right? So he was also part of he was a theologian, pastor, and reformer in Geneva, and he was the main responsible for what is called later Calvinism, which is theology that it's a little bit different from the Protestantism, and you have differences in what Martin Luther talks and between the Calvinists. So you have the Reformed, the Presbyterian, the Evangelical Anglican, which is the UK. You have the Congregationalists, and the Reformed Baptists, which is all those that come from Calvinists, and they are the main ones that immigrated here to the US through the England. So they were the reformers in England that ended up being called the Puritans and moved here into the US. Okay, so these are the responsible for all the branches of
Sorry,
of
João,
Protestantism.
which one moved to America?
The Puritans were
Okay.
the base.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks.
yeah, the Puritans that were in a way they call the Reformed Baptists that had an origin in Calvinism a little bit, but in the end, the main ideas of the Reformation are the same on all the followers. They have differences in their practices, in their details, but they all belong to a branch, the same branch of Christianity called the Reformers of the Protestants, right? So we talked about Leo X here. You know, the indulgences. Of course, this generated a lot of wars. We talked about this war, the religious wars in Europe, and this also created a lot of problems and separation in Europe. And you ended up having what Europe is today, basically, where you have the Protestants in Germany, Austria, and the Northern Europe, and then you have the Roman Church still predominant in Italy, Spain, Portugal, France, and then you have the Orthodox religion, which is Greece and some Eastern Europe, and you have the UK, which has its own church, the Church of England or the Anglican Church. But these are all consequence of what started here as the Reformation, that you know, when we look from the spiritual side, all these changes are important and are a way for humanity to move forward, but they all come with a lot of abuses, a lot of extremism, and we still see this today as the religions continue to sell the idea that outside their own religion there is no salvation, which most of the religions still preach, and which is something that we always stress here in Spiritism, that Spiritism is not the way to salvation. The only way to salvation is charity, and salvation in the sense that is an inner thing. It's not an external. We are not saved by some external factor. We save ourselves through our moral and intellectual progress, and the only way to progress is through charity. Spiritually, where you align yourself to, as long as you are connecting with the higher spirits, you are on the right path, independently of what path you choose. Okay. Okay, questions, comments? Luis, I saw that you opened your camera, but then we started the second part, so we didn't give you time to speak. You had something to say, or?
Actually, just something related to the Middle Ages. Just sharing with you. I had a chance to watch recently a movie that's about maybe 10, 15 years old, called Papisa Joanna. It's regarding, it's not history, it's regarding the hypothesis that one of the early popes was actually a woman. But I would suggest, if you have a chance, to watch it, because the representation of the early Middle Ages in this particular movie, I found very interesting, especially the cultural aspect. So just a suggestions for you guys, if you have a chance, spend a few minutes watching this movie. You might find interesting, because I think it's very difficult for us in our current day and age to actually have a grasp on what was life in the early Middle Ages. It was so very different that it's almost impossible for us to understand it. So just a suggestion.
Okay, while we were talking, I was researching here, Pope John, that's the name in English, and it's from 1972.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, it's not. It's impossible. It's a different movie.
It's a different one?
Yeah, it's not 72. It's something later. Anyway.
Yeah, well, anyway, in English, I only found this one. Yeah, okay. That's
2009.
2009. So it's a new version. Yeah. Okay. I don't know if where it's from. It's
just a second. It is a German, UK, Italy, Spain production. It's spoken in English.
okay. Okay. Yeah, I don't see it here, but anyway. This 1972 is with Liv Ullmann as the Pope. It's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so probably it's a second. I only watched the 2009 version. It's directed by Sonk Vortman. Sonk is a Danish name, I would say. Anyway, just a suggestion.
Okay.
I had something else to say, but I don't want to monopolize the time here.
That's okay. Anyone else?
I have a question. What is the name of the Czech reformist, the very first one again?
Jan
Hus. Jan Hus, yes.
Yeah. There is a Czech movie from the 50s that is difficult to watch, but it's very interesting if you want to learn more about him. It's a very good movie if you can survive the bad quality of a movie made in Czech Republic, in the Czechoslovakia of that time in 1950 something.
Wow.
But tells the story of Jan Hus, and it was recovered in Brazil by that Video Versátil, which was they try to recover videos, important videos related to Spiritism. The one that publishes all this that video with instruções psicofônicas and that sort. So there is a 1954 movie. Actually, I'm seeing here there is a 2015 historical television film also made in Czech. So we're going to search for this one. Yeah, let's see if I can find that one. So you have these two movies, and you see in the movies, you see the thoughts of Jan Hus already, the seeds of what Kardec brings later. It's very interesting. Jan Hus, Janhus.
Yeah. So my question is, I read a little bit on Martin Luther, but I didn't see any relationship between the two of them, as if Martin Luther was inspired by Jan Hus at all. It seemed like it was two separated movement, right? Or am I wrong?
Yes, it's when they say the precursors, meaning that they started both Jan Hus and
Martin Luther.
No, I forgot the other name. The other name, John Wycliffe. They, which was an English theologian, and they started the movement of rebelling against the impositions of the church. So they started questioning the church, and Jan Hus, for instance, printed the Bible in Czech. He was before Martin Luther that started printing the Bible in German. He printed the Bible in Czech, and that created a lot of problems for him. So it's the ideas that came from Hus and and John Wycliffe ended up being similar to the ideas of Martin Luther, Calvin, Erasmus, and they are all connected. And but we don't. I agree with you. We don't find a direct influence if you search for it. But again, thinking from the spiritual aspect of it, right? You can see that the ideas come from with them from the spiritual side and are disseminate from one to another, right?
Yeah, that was exactly my point. How come a point where the divine spirituality it feels a need to intervene, and it seems like it was necessary, because we were saying that to unite is always better, right? To be united is always better. But it seems like at that point it was necessary to create divisions. Not well, individuals are like or breaking up the religiosity or taking the power for one single hand.
Yeah.
Just as a comment, Jan Hus was burned alive by the church.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was, yes. And he was tricked into go to a meeting in Germany to discuss how he could continue with using his thoughts and trying to reach an agreement. And when he went there, he was caught and burned, and then tried and burned. So yes. Okay, yeah. So I was.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Elmo.
I just want to finish here. My thought is that there was a need, I believe, of create those divisions so people would have greater liberty to express, to use their own free will. That was necessary to break down that one single power of the church, so and spread it along so people could have more freedom to express their free will. Unfortunately, most of the micro universes become very impositive, very imposters themselves of creating a lot of impositions of their own.
Yeah, it's exactly what happens, and that's why what Emmanuel is telling here in the end, right?
Yeah.
That Luther responded to the extremism of abuse with the extremism of intolerance, and intolerance continues until today. For most religions are intolerant to others, right? And fortunately, that's something that harms all religions. But more and more, we know that this intolerance is going to slowly disappear because more and more people move away from tolerant religions, right? Of course, if we look at today's picture of religiosity, fanaticism, it's still very difficult to see a day where it will no longer exist. But we just have to look historically, right? That we were persecuting and burning everyone and converting people by force. And nowadays, the number of people doing that is much smaller. We still have a lot of religious persecutions and religious oppression in many places in the world. But as we continue evolving, this will become less and less part of religions, because religions that will continue persecution will continue to lose members, and they will have to renew themselves if they want to survive, right?
Yep.
So, yeah, Selma, anything else?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah. So we're not going to go into the next item. I was hoping we'd finish this chapter, but there is a lot to talk about the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, and the Jesuit order, and which is a very controversial part of this book that we will have to discuss next month with a little better understanding of the spiritual world. And we're going to talk about Emmanuel incarnation as Manuel da Nóbrega in Brazil, because he was a Jesuit, and he has inner knowledge of what he's writing here if you read, and get shocked by what he writes. But we'll have to continue that next month, because we're already 4 minutes from the end. Okay. So what do we have here? So next Sunday, it's the last Sunday of the month. We are going to do, we don't have anything scheduled, so we are going to do a Q&A, because we've been doing some very interesting Q&As. We have been having very good discussions. So we are going to have our Q&A next, instead of having the first Sunday of March. We're going to have it next Sunday, which is the last Sunday of February. Okay. And Carol, can you do our final prayer?
Yes, thank you, John and Elmo and everyone. Infinite Creator, First Cause, we are grateful to be together today for our studies. We are grateful for the in-depth knowledge that we have received about the shifts, the major flow, and the changes that occurred throughout the Renaissance. We are grateful to see that the migrations occurred, allowing greater freedom of expression, greater freedom to study religions, and greater freedom to move to those areas of the world needed to create the flow of unification ideas. We are grateful to our spiritual benefactors, the good spirits, the mentors who are with us today. We are grateful for their guidance, for their wonderful help to all of us, for those who are in need, those who are perhaps in need of healing, who are suffering now. We are grateful for their inspiration. We give thanks for what we have received today and our abilities to share this through connectivity, through the Zoom that has enabled us to do this. We are grateful, so grateful for our studies, and may we continue throughout the week with our prayers, with our mindfulness, and a greater depth of study. And we go forth today asking humbly for the love of light of Christ to be within us, within our minds, within our hearts, and within our bodies. May we share this with others through our discernment as they are able to receive this. May we go forth today and in safety and protection, being guided by and flanked by our guides. May we go home to our loved ones, friends, family, and perhaps our coworkers today, allowing this vibration to be expanded in the world. We humbly close now and give thanks for all who have participated today, those who are with us throughout the world, those who are in our community, and those who have actually created the presentations. We are grateful and we give thanks. We close now and remind ourselves to be beacons of light. We go forth now in peace, so be it.